So what we can conclude is that climate change is more extreme under high emission scenario. Basically, under low emission scenario, we have moderate temperature increase and more rainfall throughout the year, whereas under high emission scenario, we have higher temperature increase and less rainfall during rice cultivation period. And these are aggregate results. Here we look at the rice yields, at changes in mean rice yields over all 100 plots in our sample over all 100 realizations under each climate scenario. And we see that for DSAT predictions, mean yields decrease under both high and low emission scenario. So this is first row, the magnitude of the change, second row expresses it 8%, and third row gives the significance level of that change. And we see that both the magnitude of the decrease in yields, according to DSAT, is much higher under low emission scenario, which was actually the milder climate change scenario. So one reason for that might be that under low emission scenario, there's much more rainfall in December and January, which is when grain is actually already mature. So this increased rainfall just beats down the crop or destroys the crop that's already there. And then under economic model predictions, we also see that yields decrease, aggregate yields decrease under both high and low emission scenario. However, here, although yields also decrease more under low emission scenario, and that difference is statistically significant, but the magnitude of the difference is much smaller according to model prediction. Yeah.
You mentioned the higher rainfall at the end of the crop cycle. Is that explicitly understood to be detrimental to yield in terms of damage to the standing crop or problems with rot in delivering to market, or is it more neutral than that?
Explicit understood, you mean like is it
part of the crop model that elevated rainfall at that stage can actually cause problems with bringing in the harvest?
It can be. It's incorporated in the crop model in the sense that
is.
The crop model, it models the growth of the crop day by day, and it carries forward the amount of energy in the plant, the photosynthetic effect. It's looking at the soil parameters, and it's looking at the rainfall and modeling soil moisture. So if the soil moisture reaches a certain threshold effect, it will then model that detrimental effect on the plant. It's modeling the whole system, so it should be incorporated.
And it can even delay harvest because I don't know what their harvest practices are, but I could see like just mechanical issues with that crop just standing there until it was actually feasible to bring it in.
And that's one thing, we do not model possible changes in timing of operations, and that's obviously one of the first ways in which farmers would probably adjust to climate change.
We just assume they harvest at the point of peak growth of the plant.
I see. That's
peak grain size. That's our assumed harvest point.
So these yields become really upper bounds in a sense.
In this set model, yeah.
So you're comparing the DSAT predictions with the economic predictions in the sense that starting from similar climate scenarios, we're going to say, well, the DSAT tells me the physical growth after planting and getting some yield, and the economic model says, also starting from the climate predictions, it's going to say, well, I'm going to model some shocks to the agriculture, to this economy, and given that shocks, I will also see different outputs in the yields of rice. Is that?
Well, the changes in shocks, which is rainfall shocks, are also incorporated into DSAT. So the difference between these two is that here we assume, yes, there's different rainfall, there's different weather shocks, but farmers do not change their input levels. They use the same amount of inputs they used to use before. Whereas here, we incorporate both this kind of outside effect of different climate, but we'll also say that farmers see the climate changes, so they'll use more or less seeds and fertilizer. So that's the difference. And here we look at rice yields by plot. So for each plot, we compare 100 rice yields realizations under neutral scenario to 100 realizations under high and low scenario. And we do mean equality tests. So first we look at DSAT predictions. And for high emissions scenario, first row gives percent of sample with statistically significant increase or decrease in yield. These are 5% statistical significance level results. We also look at 1 and 10% and results all. This is the magnitude of the yield, and this is the magnitude expressed in percent. And this is the set results comparing neutral to low emissions scenario. So again, here we see that yields decrease according to DSAT, and they again decrease more under low emissions scenario, even when we look at individual plot by plot. And the decrease is strong under low emissions scenario in two ways. First, more plots are affected, and also the magnitude of the change is much higher under low emissions scenario than high emissions scenario. Then when we look at the model predictions, the results are very different. So the table is constructed in the same way. According to the model, first we see that the percent of the plots that experience decrease in yields under high emissions scenario more than doubles compared to DSAT. Because under DSAT it was kind of a quarter of the sample. Now it's almost 70%. However, the magnitude of the decrease is much smaller according to the model. It was like 34% as opposed to 13%. So more plots are affected, but the magnitude of the decrease more than halves. Then, according to the model, under low emissions scenario, the majority of the sample actually benefits from the from the climate change, and they experience statistically significant increase in yield, although the magnitude is very small. So comparing,
Is that saying that farmers just decide to abandon some plots? Is it
Okay,
98%
here-
change? It
here
seems-
like some plots experience is kind of this crop failure.
So it's basically the farmer's not going
No, they started the cultivation process, but like the crop just completely dies out. early on.
What do you assume about the evolution of the input prices? So what happens to wages and rental capital?
We don't change those.
They're just constant.
Yeah.
Good.
We don't incorporate any modeling of larger scale adjustments.
How much do the inputs change of the farmers? Like, and what's the magnitude? So, how much does labor demand change, for example? Like in one of these.
I'm trying to remember. First, the changes of labor, non-labor input between high and low emissions scenario, they vary a lot. Like they go in different directions
Right.
sometimes. And then changes also are different, like plot to plot. Some farmers use more labor for given operations, some farmers use less. And the magnitude also varies kind of significantly dependent on the input and the stage. Like some increase by couple of percent, some increase by 20%. So there's a lot of variation, but there's a lot of also heterogeneity in the way the variation occurs.
Yeah,
So
I mean, so what in the aggregate does it kind of wash out? So I'm asking because,
Yeah.
like, if aggregate labor demand changes a lot, you'd think that the wage changes a lot. If the labor market is local, sort of.